Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello and welcome to episode 18 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is Mark Leslie Lefebvre, your host. In this episode, I have an interview with Ricardo Fayet, who's one of the founders of Reedsy, which is an online marketplace that connects authors with top editors, designers, ghostwriters, publicists, marketers, etc. He is an avid reader and a person who travels the world to attend numerous industry events and author conferences. He shares his insights and tips for authors, including a number of free resources that authors should be taking advantage of. For a brief personal update, this is going to be my last weekly update about the ongoing training for the Waterloo Half Marathon. It takes place this Sunday, April 29th. Last weekend, with the late but very much beloved arrival of spring-like weather, Liz and I did an outside 18K run. Though we were delayed in our training, the gym membership and that challenging game of getting back into the training, mostly on treadmill, but then, outside whenever we could bear the weather, has actually gone really, really well. We actually survived the 18K this past weekend, and we have confidence that we'll be okay this Sunday doing the 21 kilometers. Now, we won't be qualifying for anything like the Boston Marathon in a run, but we're pleased to be able to be doing this and doing it together. You see, it's not about finishing with a lightning quick time, it's about experiencing it together. Okay, go ahead and insert your "aww" here. But that is what I love about our relationship, doing things that we enjoy and challenging one another in new ways. Our next big project will be working on the nonfiction book Spirits Untapped, a book about haunted bars and breweries. Now, this has been pitched to my publisher Dundurn already, and we're waiting to hear back on if they're interested in publishing this and when, but we do plan on working on the book this summer, the summer of 2018. We launched the website, spiritsuntapped.com, a few years ago, and we've already been writing and sharing our passion and our many travels that involve going to beer places and craft beer. The blog itself is more about the spirit of beer culture, but it does, of course, include some of the spirits of beer culture, which will be the focus of the book Spirits Untapped. Now, speaking of spirited places, an update for those of you who reached out and said that you were curious about the ongoing Free Friday Fright stats. I was talking in episode 17 about, how few people actually saw the video I had posted of the Friday the 13th video. So last week I did a live reading of my horror story, Phantom Mitch. So it was a fiction week. And I did that at the Winking Judge Bar in Hamilton. Yes, it's a haunted bar that I've written about in the past and will be writing about again because I haunt the place regularly. And it's always great when I can combine multiple passions. So here are some updated numbers because some of you have asked. Now, the previous week's Friday the 13th video has now hit a grand total of 17 views on Facebook and 8 views on YouTube. So it's still not really doing much. It's there, but the numbers are slightly bigger than they were the week before, and that's fine. A week has passed, and I've got a few more views. And again, week after week after week, 52 weeks later, that could grow. It doesn't seem to be a big growth now, but growth happens over time. Rome, as they say, was not built in a day, etc., etc. And I'm in this for the long term, as I've mentioned already. Now, interestingly enough, last week's video is already proving more popular. So the Facebook reading of Phantom Mitch, even though I had technical issues and I was 10 minutes delayed, it has received 84 views on Facebook. And the YouTube version of it, because I upload it to YouTube a few days afterwards usually, has had a total of 4 views. But again, it's interesting. Is this trend telling me that people enjoy the fiction reading more than just talking about the ghost stories? Which is weird because when I've done book events, I've had far more success attracting audiences to come hear the true ghost stories than to go to a fiction reading. So interesting to see that. Is it a trend, or is it just because people were afraid of the Friday the 13th and weren't interested in superstitions? Who knows? Tomorrow, which is Friday, April 27th, for my Free Friday Frights, I'm back on nonfiction, and I'm going to be talking about the ghost of Jack Kerouac at Haslam's Bookstore in St. Pete's, Florida. This is something I wrote about in the book Tomes of Terror, Haunted Bookstores and Libraries. And Haslam's is a place I've actually been to when I traveled to NINC at St. Pete's in Florida in the fall, and I'll be returning there again this year because it's an amazing conference. But, Haslam's is there, and it's a phenomenal bookstore to get to. So I encourage any writers listening to this, if you're going to NINC, carve some time into your schedule to get out to Haslam's bookstore. If you're going this year, reach out to me. Maybe we can split a cab or an Uber or whatever together to get to it. It's really, really awesome. You've got an amazing historic bookstore, potentially hearing stories directly from staff about the ghosts of Jack Kerouac. And hey, if you're into craft beer like me, just down the street is an amazing craft brewery that I discovered on my last visit to Haslam's. Anyways, tomorrow I'm doing that talk, and we'll see if it's more interesting than the superstition of the Friday the 13th. Again, it's all about experimenting, and I'm more than happy to share the stats on how this is going. So thank you for asking. I am more than willing to be transparent and share how these experiments are going. And now, because I can almost hear that music sneaking up on us, I think it's time to do the terrible tongue twister. Twisted by the, twisted by the, twisted by the, twisted by the, twisted by the fool, twisted by the fool, twisted by the fool, such a fool. Okay, so for this week's Terrible Tongue Twister, sponsored by Find a Way Voices, we have a... Okay, say this one 5 times really fast. Here goes. So, this is the sushi chef. 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 Ha 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 ho! Whoa! I think I made it through that one without stumbling. You might say I was really cooking. Okay. Terrible jokes aside, that was the Terrible Tongue Twister sponsored by Findaway Voices. And if you're curious to see what audio magic Findaway Voices can cook up for you, you can check them out at starkreflections.ca/findaway. Such a fool. All right, that is enough of the pre-interview rambling from me. Let's get on to this fascinating conversation with Ricardo Fayet from Reedsy. Hey, Ricardo, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Mark. Really happy to be here.
So you have been growing and expanding in such a fascinating way in the last couple of years. But for any of our listeners who aren't familiar with Reedsy, I first want to go back to you and how you got into the book industry, and then why a company like Reedsy?
Yeah, so I often get the "what's your background" question, and I haven't come up with a good answer yet because I don't really have a background before Reedsy. So Reedsy is my only kind of background. I started it straight after business school, and it comes from conversation with a friend of mine, Emmanuel, our CEO, around self-publishing. So he'd been studying in Canada for 6 months. So Canada is really at the heart of Reedsy, you see.
Of course. Yeah, that's why it's such a nice company.
Exactly. And that's where I think he learned for the first time about self-publishing. We'd been very early adopters of the first e-readers, and we were just thinking, okay, what does this kind of ebook revolution mean for the author side? And when we learned about self-publishing, the first question was, it's great that authors can now publish their books on their own, but there's a lot more to publishing a book than just writing it. So who does the editing? Who does the design? who markets the book. And so we had this idea of Reedsy, of creating a place where authors could find people to work on the book, editors, designers, illustrators, formatters, and that's where the idea of Reedsy comes from.
Okay. And so your specific role within Reedsy, I mean, you are often the man on the street or the man at the book fair or the man at the author show. I have seen you all over the world. I've seen you in Europe. I have seen you in North America in multiple locations. How much of your time is actually spent on the road?
Say 30% maybe,
Yeah.
20-30%. So we don't do as many conferences as other companies like Draft Digital, for example. They're literally everywhere. But we do most of the book fairs because we work with publishers as well. So that's where we see the publishers.
Okay.
And then we do quite a few author conferences here and there, mostly in the US because we don't have a huge employee presence in the US. And so it's good to go there once in a while for conferences.
Okay. Now, the company has expanded significantly, and I think you'd mentioned you do have employees around the world.
Yeah, we do. We have 2 in the US right now. We have the third one, but she's gone on a work around the world, remote kind of philosophy, which is great. And we have one employee in Canada, but the rest is mostly in Europe.
Okay. Now, because you're working with people from the publishing industry, and because Reedsy does a lot of curation so that authors don't have to do that curation, have you found with the changes in the publishing industry that there's a lot more, for example, freelance editors who maybe used to work full-time for a publisher but now are available?
Definitely. That's a trend that started pretty much at the same time as self-publishing. And it's what allowed us to build Reedsy, really. It's at the same time that a bunch of authors started leaving their publishing companies or just started self-publishing. A lot of editors who were employed by publishing companies started going freelance. Sometimes it wasn't by choice, but often it was actually by choice. Most publishing companies outsource copy editing and proofreading. When I say most, it's like at least 90% of publishing companies out there. Nowadays, sometimes some of the developmental acquisitions editing is outsourced even. A lot of the cover design is outsourced. Almost all typesetting is outsourced. So that's created a lot of freelancers. And these freelancers, the great thing for them is they can work for several companies.
Right.
And since they're self-publishing now, they can also work directly with authors. And they generally prefer that because they have more creative freedom. They have more contact with the editor, with the author. So that's what allowed us to build Reedsy. We've got at least 400, I think, editors on the platform now.
Wow.
And we tend to accept only 3% of the people who apply to be on Reedsy. So that gives you an idea of the number of applications we've received over the years to be listed as an editor on Reedsy.
So I just so authors can understand. So the level of professional that you're dealing with is not, oh, hey, I think I can edit a book. I'm going to go create a profile on Reedsy. If when an editor, for example, is going to set up a profile on Reedsy, what's roughly the process that they have to go through?
So first they have to create a profile. And that's the key thing. So we've created profiles where they can put in all their information and we look closely at their work experience, the genres they specialize in, the type of editing they specialize in, and then their portfolio. So all the books that they've worked on as an editor. Then we make sure that their work experience matches what they say they specialize in. So if they've worked as an in-house developmental editor for 5 years, we make sure that they list like developmental editing, editorial assessment, query letter review, but not say copy editing, proofreading, and indexing. And then we make sure that the books that are in the portfolio match the work experience. So they say that they've worked 5 years at Penguin Random House. We take a look at the books that are in their portfolio and we make sure that they've been published by Penguin Random House. We make sure that they're listed in those books, in at least some of those books, acknowledgements. So we do quite a bit of background check. And then we make sure that the genres they specialize in also match the books in the portfolio, so that if an author comes on Reedsy looking for a fantasy editor, they're going to filter their search by fantasy, and they're going to find only editors who worked on fantasy in the past. So we try to get people who are specialized. And then we look at those profiles and we make sure that everything matches. And what we look mainly for in terms of criteria is experience at a traditional publisher, or people who have worked as freelancers with best-selling authors in their genre.
Okay.
So yeah, we try to go for kind of top-notch professionals.
So you're doing the reference checks, you're doing the background checks to make sure that they've done what they said that they've done. Okay, so for example, now I'm going to approach this. So I'm an author, and let's say that Dundurn, who publishes my nonfiction, traditionally published books, the paranormal books, and I decide, or they decide they don't want to do my next book, or I decide I want to do this myself, and I'm going to hire a developmental editor to work on my manuscript for me. What do I do? Where do I go?
Well, you go to Reedsy.
Of course. And how do I get there?
So you go to reedsy.com or reedsy.com, and you just sign up as an author. And then you will get immediately to our marketplace, which basically lists all the professionals who've been accepted.
Okay.
You can filter your search by genre, by type of editing. So you can say, okay, I'm looking for developmental editor for my paranormal. Then you can also we added Elasticsearch through keywords. So for example, if you've got ghosts in your book, you can add ghost as a keyword to see the kind of editors who show up.
Okay.
Just for fun, just to refine a little bit more. And then you look at the profiles that come up. You can click on the profile to kind of expand it, see the works in the portfolio, the work experience. And then we ask that every author selects the editors they want to reach out to. So you don't just post a job offer or I'm looking for to everyone. You actually select the people you want to reach out to.
Okay.
And you can select up to 5 editors and send them a single brief. We pre-generate the questions on the brief based on the kind of service you're looking for. So if it's for developmental editing, we're going to ask you the length of the manuscript, the title, the genre, a bit about a synopsis, a bit about the characters, who you think your target market is, and then we're going to ask you to attach a sample of your manuscript, or the whole manuscript if you want to. And then that brief gets distributed to all the editors, and they come back to you with either quotes or questions or messages within 2 working days.
Okay, cool. So it's basically the question, I mean, I get from a lot of authors is, well, where do I find a trusted professional? And obviously the answer is Reedsy.com.
Yeah.
So because it's been a curated professional, not just somebody who slapped up something on their door and said, I'm an editor because I've proofread once. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, there are a lot of people like that out there. And they all apply to the list on Reedsy. And it's very easy to recognize them because their first question is, I finished my profile, why am I not showing up in the searches, and how do I find clients? And
okay.
that's kind of the mentality, that the good editors we get, we have to chase them to finish a profile because they're busy. And then they're not desperate to show up in search results because they've got enough work.
That's right, because they're usually like, well, in 6 months I might have a window.
Exactly. So that's a sign that the editor is good. If you're not going to find your editor through Reedsy, at least make sure that they're busy, basically. Busy editor is generally good.
Okay, yeah, it's a sign that, and it's usually from a referral from an author friend who's used them. That's how I've found an editor in the past, was through a couple friends who'd used this guy, and I had to wait 9 months. So that was a good sign. Okay, so the other thing, and this is the thing, so you guys are known as an incredible marketplace that's curated, and you don't just let anyone in. Well, you let an author in because they can go in and look for someone, but for the professionals who are offering services. So we talked about editing. What are the other services that are available through that I can find through Reedsy?
Yeah, so we've got all areas of design. So obviously cover design, also book interior design, which is more important for illustrated works, graphic novels, cookbooks, photography, arts, etc. Illustration, if you're looking for an illustrator for a children's book or a graphic novel, we've got really good ones. Book marketing and publicity, which are 2 different things. So we've got publicists for people who really want to reach media outlets, traditional media outlets or blogs. It's not always a service I recommend. And book marketers, so people more to work on strategy. We've got people specializing in Amazon ads, people specializing in Facebook ads, email marketing, etc. We've just recently added a marketer specializing in Facebook chatbots. So if you're at that level where you're looking to have your author chatbot connect to your Facebook page, we've got someone who can create that for you. And we recently added web designers.
So for author website and
yeah, and we've got ghostwriters as well. But hopefully, if you're listening to this and you're an author, you don't need a ghostwriter.
Okay, unless you just have some really great ideas and you need someone to help get those
exactly
words.
Unless you're at the James Patterson level and like need 20 books written in your brand every year.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. Now, so those are the services that are available, but you guys have also built something truly phenomenal and wonderful that I don't think enough authors know about. And this is an online book editor that allows you to create and publish a book or create a professional book. Please tell us more about this.
Yeah, so it was a fun project for us because we started looking into kind of building a tool that would allow authors and editors to work together collaboratively. And we thought the first version of this tool would actually be a formatting tool, because once we started building it, immediately we were thinking, okay, it's great that authors and editors will be able to work together on it, we'll add track changes, commenting, all of that. But ultimately what the author will want is to be able to export an EPUB and a PDF. So we started building something with the idea that the author would be able to export that. So the first version we released, and which has been live for 2-3 years now, is a formatting tool called the Reedsy Book Editor, where you can either write your manuscript or copy paste it in there, separate it into chapters, parts, customize the front matter, the back matter, then choose a bunch of settings, and then export an EPUB or a PDF. So it's similar in how it works to Vellum, except it has a lot less customization possibilities. Like we've got 3 templates available. And you cannot do fancy stuff with like page corners and chapter headings and all these things, which I don't think are really necessary, but a lot of authors want. The other difference with Vellum is that our software is free and it is available, it's browser-based. So you can access it from any device at any point, as long as you're connected to the internet.
Okay. So an author can go there with their manuscript and copy and paste it, edit it online, maybe even with a collaborator. And then they can actually produce an EPUB that's going to be able to be loaded to Amazon, to Kobo, to iBooks, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. And a PDF as well. So we do print. We create print-ready PDFs. What you're not able to do yet is actually collaborate with editors on it. So this V1 of the book editor is really a formatting tool, and you're the only one who can access the document.
Okay.
V2, which we hope to be able to release either this year or next one, is going to have multi-person collaboration in real time. So that's using a kind of technology that almost no one uses out there. Like even if you use Google Docs, it's going to crash after 80,000 or 100,000 words. So the challenge for us is to leverage a different kind of technology that allows for higher scalability. So we're doing that. It's almost ready, and then we'll just have to add track changes, commenting, and build an interface that's much, much nicer for track changes than words. So yeah, pretty cool challenge for a tech team. And I think it's really going to change the way a lot of authors work with editors.
Oh, that's great. So, for example, I mean, once version 2 rolls out, I could use Reedsy to find my editor, but then we could potentially also use the free tool to collaborate. There's other ways we could do it, but that may also be that way it's all one place.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, no, and we get a lot of authors right now writing their books on our editor because they really like it. So people would like potentially be able to write their book on the book editor, would have an offline version available, then find an editor, work with that editor, find a copy editor, work with that copy editor. We'll have a timeline saving all the versions of the manuscript so you can see the changes, revert back to previous version if you want. So yeah, it's going to be, I think it's our next main project really at Reedsy.
Oh, that's cool. Now, there's another thing that you have available, and I'm not sure people are aware of, is you actually offer courses to help
Yep,
authors.
absolutely. I think so most people know us for our marketplace, and a few other people know us for our courses. But it's not that many people who know us for both. So it's an initiative we started in October 2016. And we now have over 35 courses available. So the courses are all email based and last 10 days. So you sign
Okay.
up for a course on Amazon ads, for example, and over 10 days you'll get an email, one email a day in the morning, and it's a 5-minute read with a
Okay.
few screenshots in there, but it's all text based. So you wake up, you get your coffee, and you just like read this little email. It takes you 5 minutes, and you learn something new every day. So a lot of people have really liked this format.
Oh, cool.
And all the courses are free, obviously. And once
And
you finish
you said there's
a course,
35 of them. So
yeah,
there's no reason why somebody can't spend 5 minutes a day to learn what it is they're looking to learn for free,
exactly.
completely.
Yeah,
Love that. That's fantastic. So you get the free formatting tool, the book editor. You've got the free courses as well, and then you have the free service that basically allows you to find vetted professionals to work
yeah.
with.
That's actually where we make our money. So it's not
Yeah,
it's not free. If you hire an editor through Reedsy, the way it works is that we're going to charge you 10%
right,
on top of their quote. So if the editor quotes $1,000, we'll charge you 1,100,
right.
and we'll take that 100.
Yeah, because you have to make money, otherwise it's not a business, it's just a charity, right? And so
Exactly.
you've
Yeah.
created some great tools that help authors out, and you've given, I mean, it doesn't cost me anything to use Reedsy to find an editor. It's
No.
only once I find someone I want to work with, then I pay.
Exactly.
And that's where Reedsy makes its money. And I love when a company is transparent about where it is that they make their money, because then you don't worry. Well, what's the catch, right? That's
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
the
There
I
was
guess.
a company that didn't say where they were making their money, and they didn't last that long. So.
Oh yeah, I know. That's kind of strange, isn't it? Or some of them don't say where they're making their money, but they're making it hand over fist, and we're still trying
Exactly.
to figure that out. Okay, so speaking of the industry and some of the other players out there, you just got back from London Book Fair. It's towards the third week of April.
Yeah.
You've just been at London Book Fair, which is one of the biggest book shows in the world. You know, Frankfurt, London, New York are probably the three of the English language ones that
Yeah.
we do. What was your impression? Because you've been going there for a number of years. What's your impression of London Book Fair in terms of as a professional in the industry, and then B, as from an author's perspective?
I think, yeah, from a professional in the industry, I think the mood's gone a bit more sour in the last few years at London Book Fair. So I generally go there mostly to talk to publishers because
Right.
Reedsy works. As I said, all publishers outsource copy editing, proofreading, cover design. So we try to be the company they outsource it to, or at
Okay.
least that they use to find the freelancers. And we work a lot with fiction publishers, and fiction, just like fiction's rights acquisition has gone down. Fiction sales for traditional publishers have gone down as well. So they're not that optimistic. And what we see is actually the contacts we have in publishing companies keep shifting around. So yeah, this year what was really funny is there was one book that was promoted like crazy at the book fair, which is a book called "The President is Missing," and
Okay.
it is supposedly co-written by James Patterson and Bill Clinton. So
Okay.
it's probably written by a ghostwriter or two, but these are the cover. And I think it's Hachette. I think it's Hachette who's publishing it. I might be wrong on that. And they, on top of their huge Hachette stand, they had a stand, an oval, yeah, an oval stand, just with a White House in there, uh, just to promote the book. And they had people disguised as Donald Trump walking around with like copies of the book. There was so much promotion around this book, which made me question like first, they must have thrown tens of thousands of dollars into this. And
Right.
London Book Fair is all about getting books sold, so foreign rights, audio rights, possibly movie rights, though those are usually dealt before London Book Fair, and also getting booksellers to acquire copies of the books for their bookstores.
Right.
And I'm thinking almost everyone is going to buy that book because like you don't need to promote it like crazy. So yeah, I think publishers are desperate to find that big hit that they haven't had since Harry Potter, pretty much.
Yeah, and I mean, and yeah, I've heard a lot of rumblings about nonfiction is the current thing that people were looking for. Okay.
And from an author perspective, I think it's grown a lot. There were even more people this year in this little corner they call Author HQ.
Okay.
That's dedicated to kind of self-publishing or education around self-publishing versus traditional publishing. That's dedicated really towards authors. Same size as always, so they keep it small. But a lot of people were like cramming together to hear the presentation.
They keep making it smaller, and the audiences keep getting bigger every year, from what I've seen.
Which tells you what the mentality of the organizers at the London Book Fair is. So, no, I think it was a good one this year, a better one for authors. Last year I was really worried because there was a huge vanity publisher, one of the biggest predators in the UK, that I cannot really talk about because they sue everyone who talks about them,
Of course.
who was right outside the Author HQ. Got a booth there.
I recognize who you're speaking about, and I will not name them either.
Exactly. Perfect.
Yes. But they put a lot of money into a large booth, didn't they?
They did. Yeah. They did, and they had at least 5 girls like distributing flyers about their company.
Yeah.
So that really angered me, and I wrote to London Book Fair and I told them that I wasn't ever going to buy a booth from them because each year they contact me, and first I don't think there's value in a booth there for us, but I also think that they're taking money from people who are preying on authors. So this year there wasn't one, but I think London Book Fair is there to make money. It makes most of its money from publishers. So they don't really care that much about the Author HQ, and they see it more as a way to make additional money. So they're going to pretty much allow anyone in there.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. Now, in terms of speaking of the industry, what are the trends that you have noticed? Now, you said that traditional publishing is talking about nonfiction trends. What are the trends that you have recognized are, growing and maybe the next big thing in terms of the indie author community?
So one really interesting trend is I think most of the authors who've really made it in the past few years, who are selling hundreds of thousands or millions of copies every year, they've gone a lot quieter. Like we don't have huge, like the best-selling indies 4 or 5 years ago, the Hugh Howeys, Bella Andre, etc. They were very vocal about self-publishing because it was early days and needed the validation. Now self-publishing authors don't need the validation anymore. Everyone knows that it's a valid path, if not the better one. So I know a bunch of authors who are making millions every year and no one talks about them, and they don't talk them that much about themselves. So I think for debut authors, it kind of feels like they've missed their chance, like the golden era of self-publishing is over, but I think it's completely the opposite. It's just that the people who are selling a lot are less vocal about it, understandably as well.
So there's probably more people making good money, but it's not news anymore.
Exactly, pretty much.
Okay.
Pretty much.
Because it's just a standard for a lot of people now.
Yeah, it is. And we're seeing more competition, so we're starting to see some ugly things. Before it was, and it still is, I think, an industry that's incredibly supportive.
Right.
With amazing people. That's why I love working for Reedsy. I mean, it's why I love this company is that, it allows us to work with authors, with the self-publishing community, which is absolutely awesome. But obviously, since it's become a lot more competitive, we start seeing some fights and some other things in there, which is entirely normal when an industry becomes a bit more mature.
I can imagine. Okay.
So I think there are more opportunities now, and we're seeing, thanks to the emergence of self-publishing, especially in fiction, we're seeing more diversity in the types of books that are put out there. People finding niches and growing them. Like cat cozy mysteries. I mean, that's huge on Amazon now. And like, who would have thought that cat cozy mysteries would be huge? Would have been huge if the big five were still dominating the fiction publishing scene. We probably would never have had these thousands of niches that have that grown an audience.
Well, yeah, because I think and this would be maybe the smaller publishers or the indie publishers can more cater to a specific crowd and say, yeah, there may only be 100,000 people who want to read this book, but there's 100,000 people who want to read this book, as opposed to shooting for 10 million or something like that. And you find they're a lot more successful because the overhead is probably not as giant as one of those, maybe one of the big five.
No, absolutely. I think the publishers who are growing right now, they're independent, they're smaller, they're independent, and they're Amazon imprints often, because they have the numbers on all the genres and categories, and they know where they can publish books.
They know the search. People
they
type.
Know the search.
They know exactly what everyone's looking for because they own the whole environment there.
They know the search, they own the distribution, they own everything, and they start publishing. It's like Netflix creating their own shows.
Okay. Now, you had talked a little bit about mistakes authors make on the Creative Pen podcast not all that long ago, just a few months ago. I was listening, but I was curious to kind of go along those lines. What's something that really, really frustrates you about a trend that you've noticed in the indie publishing or self-publishing community?
There's a few. There's a lot of things that bother me. No, I think that these mistakes that we're talking about with Joanne are still pretty much valid. I mean, the biggest one I see is not figuring out early on who your target market is. So I see too many authors writing something and then saying, okay, I'm going to publish it and see what happens, but I really want to make money. And for me, there's two options. Either you write something because you need to write it, and that's 100% valid. But that's not what I would call like commercial fiction. You write it because you want to write it, you publish it, and maybe you're going to sell very well. Who knows? Maybe it matches what readers are actually looking for, but maybe it's not going to match what readers are looking for. And if authors really want to go commercial, then they need to look where there's a gap in the market and publish in there. We've seen a big rush towards cozy mysteries, and that rush has rewarded pretty much any good author who's moved into there. So we're going to see where the next opportunity is going to be in the next few years. And I think if you kind of adopt this right to market mentality, you're probably going to make more money. And I understand that creatively it might not be as rewarding as writing what you need to write about.
Okay. What is something that you are really optimistic about in relation to writing and publishing right now?
I think I'm really optimistic about audiobooks because of their growth, and second of the fact that there are more players involved now, and that we're a bit more aware of the threat of Amazon becoming the dominant player. So it's still kind of, it's not virgin territory, but it's a lot newer, and everyone's trying to push for new players and new avenues that are not Amazon dominated. Especially since Amazon is a lot more rigorous. They're like, if you get into ACX or Audible, it's a 7-year contract. It's not 90 days. So yeah, there's find-away voices now for production, distribution. I think Apple is going to have its own system for audiobooks. It's not going to have an exclusivity with Audible anymore. I think Kobo's moved into audiobooks. So there are a lot more avenues, and it's a good place to be wide, I think.
Okay, cool. Now, you are an international man of mystery. No, you have very global. You've moved recently, and you're probably aware of things going on in Europe that the average person in North America doesn't even have a clue about. What are some of the trends that you see cropping up in some of the countries that you've been traveling through that may not even be on the radar of, American or Canadian, because, we're so Western centric over here?
It's hard to say because I think Europe is catching up more than leading the way when it comes to self-publishing.
Okay.
What I've seen though is probably the first authors in non-English markets, so Germany, LA, Spain, France, actually making a living out of self-publishing.
You're starting to see that in
Yeah,
the
I'm starting to see that. And that wasn't, I mean, that hadn't been the case until probably last year. There are a few German authors making really good money self-publishing. And I've started to meet a few Italian authors who make a living self-publishing in Italian. Most of them are hybrid now because they get acquired by some of their books get acquired by publishing companies over there. But I think it's a really good sign. It means that these markets are opening up, that digital reading is growing, at least in certain genres over there. And it's also countries that are less dominated by Amazon, like Kobo does a really good job in Spain, Italy, France. So a lot of these authors are wide. So I think we're maybe only 2-3 years away from it making sense for high-selling indies in the US and the UK to start looking into translation. So far, I've always said that it didn't really make sense because of how expensive translation is.
Right.
But now we're getting to a point where it might start to make sense.
Because as the markets mature, there's probably going to be a larger audience for that.
Yeah, there's going to be a larger audience. There's going to be opportunities to collaborate with local authors for the marketing and the promotion. Because that's a really tough bit is if you get your book translated in German, what do you know about the German market? You probably know very little about the distribution. You might not even have heard of Tolino or how Tolino works. You certainly have no idea how to become discoverable on all the different Tolino stores.
Right.
Or Tolino owned, yeah. Whereas a German author is going to know that. And at the same time, a German author might be looking to grow their presence in the US. So there'll be opportunities to collaborate with authors in other countries to market books over there. And yeah, readership in digital is growing. Retailers and distributors over there will have presences. So you'll be able to contact Kobo Europe to help you gain foothold in those markets. So yeah, I think we'll soon be there. I still think it's very early though.
Yeah. It feels like sometimes when you're pioneering, sometimes it feels like it's been a long time, but really, I mean, print, especially when you go to a place like Frankfurt and you see print is still dominant for much of publishing, and that people who have adopted ebook reading is still the cutting edge almost. We barely tapped into the surface of this growing market.
Absolutely.
Okay. So the one final question, and this is the question is, what's the question? Because you've been to the different shows, you go to all these different author events. What's the most common question that you find yourself answering, 5 times a day or, multiple times every week?
I think it's got to do with marketing. Almost always is either what can I do to sell more copies, or where can I find someone who's going to do the marketing for me? And I get that a lot.
Okay.
And so I have an easy answer for that, which is we've got book marketers on Reedsy. But I never give that answer because it doesn't make sense to hire a book marketer if you're looking for someone to do that stuff for you. There's no one out there who's going to do the market, who's going to set up your newsletter, so your mailing list, set up your automation sequence, set up your ads,
right,
set up your distribution, and do all that stuff for you. No one has the time for that, and they would charge insane amounts of money that wouldn't make it viable for you.
Right.
So the first step is really there's no work around this. It's learning about marketing and the basics.
Okay.
And there's millions of resources out there, so it's hard to separate the good from the bad. But we've talked about Joanna Penn, obviously we're on your podcast. We've talked about our Reedsy courses, the Reedsy blog. There's Kindlepreneur as well, the Kindlepreneur site that does a really good job at kind of talking about Amazon discoverability.
Okay. Are there some of the free courses that you offer that would be ideal for someone who has these questions? Like you should check that one or this one? I think we've got a course that I wrote, so I'm obviously going to promote it, called Book Marketing 101. That kind of sets the basics. And once you know these basics and you start testing on your own and you find, okay, I think Facebook ads are probably the way for me, then you say, okay, I'm going to hire a consultant
and do a few sessions or maybe work over a month to get better at it. And that's when it makes sense to hire a book marketer. Once you've kind of figured out who your target market is, what your goal is, how much you're ready to invest to achieve that goal, and have a solid idea of what channels you're going to use to reach it. Whether it's Facebook ads, Amazon ads, BookBub ads, all three, running price promotions, growing a mailing list. There are millions of things you can do, and you need to know about them, I think, before you look to hire a consultant.
Okay, well, thank you so much. We will include a link to the Book Marketing 101 free course from Reedsy, so authors can check that out, because it is probably one of the best places to start. Some core advice, absolutely. 5 minutes a day, morning coffee, morning insights. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today, Ricardo.
No, thank you, Mark, and I hope to see you at the next conference.
I wanted to reflect on something Ricardo spoke about: free resources. Now, there's no shortage of free resources available to authors from so many sources, and we spoke about them during the interview. I kind of like the free 10-day courses that Ricardo mentioned, and after our chat, I went and checked them out. They have topics from the craft of writing to the business of writing. They have things like how to plot a novel using a 3-act story structure, how to self-edit your manuscript like a pro, how to create the ultimate book marketing plan, pricing books for an international audience, book reviews and how to get them, and so many more. Now, I love the idea of knowing something you want to learn, but not having a lot of time to do, a full extended course that may take hours and hours and hours. So why not sign up for something like this and get that daily morning email with a quick 5-minute read? 5 minutes. Certainly you can invest 5 minutes in your day to learn something new about the craft or the business of writing. It's a great warm-up, and certainly more interesting than maybe seeing the latest social media mishap being tossed around, or train wreck, or whatever it is, or even one of my, hey, look at me and my funny cat Instagram pictures. In episode 17, Stina Holmes talked about her free branding for authors email courses. Now, I signed up for that after chatting with her, and I've already enjoyed learning from them. And I recently signed up for a couple of Reedsy courses too, so I can continue learning about things that I want to learn more about. And there's always something to learn more about in this industry. Now, I like the idea of reading these short email tips while waiting for my morning coffee to brew, or maybe glancing at them while I'm stuck in line waiting at the grocery store. It's a great leverage of that time that you can find in your day. Now, yes, I know I'm talking about free, and I know it's also important to pay for professional services, and that really is what Reedsy is. It's a marketplace where you can find professional services. Yes, it's good for authors to invest money into their work and into their writing, but it's also important, I think, for authors to take advantage of the great free resources that are available. Every little bit we do, every little bit we learn helps. So free is great. I spoke in episode 14 of 5 ways you can use free to optimize your author platform. But don't forget to take advantage of the many great free resources available to you as an author. Now, speaking of free, I offer one-on-one consulting. But did you know that you can get 20 minutes of my time for free? Yeah, really. You see, I think authors shouldn't commit to paying for something without first understanding and recognizing the value, or lack thereof, of what they might be paying for. Call the 20 minutes a free sample, the same sort of thing you'd get at Costco when you want to taste some food that you're not sure you want to try. And sometimes when I'm on trips to Costco, that free sample is enough to fill me, and I'm happy and I'm sated and I can skip a meal. Sometimes that free 20 minutes might be enough for an author to get quick value that they need, and they're done. And that's cool. Sometimes it helps determine if it's a right fit. Maybe it isn't a right fit, and oftentimes it isn't, and that's okay. I'm actually happy if in that 20 minutes an author walks away richer for the experience, because it means that I was able to help someone move to that next step. in their own author journey. In any case, I thought I would share that information, and I've taken enough of your free time. And I do appreciate you listening to this podcast, because that in and of itself is an investment that you've already made in me, and I appreciate that. I hope I'm providing you value for that time, whether it's information, inspiration, or perhaps just a reminder that you're not alone on this writer journey. And if you found value there, I'd love for you to consider leaving a review of this podcast or sharing it with a writer friend. Also, for those of you who've also invested monetarily, thank you for those of you who are sponsoring the Stark Reflections podcast on Patreon. My corporate sponsorship helps pay for the hosting fees, but your patron support shows that you enjoy the show enough to want to help pay for the time it takes for me to produce it on a weekly basis. My own desire is that as a patron, you receive far more value than it costs you, both in the podcast itself and in the exclusive additional content you're receiving. The first Q&A Patreon only audio is coming shortly, and I look forward to answering those questions that I've received. Now, thank you all for joining me in episode 18 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is Mark Leslie Lefebvre, wishing you good reflections and good writing.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.